The Dhammapada, Chapter 3, Chitta Vagga, Mind, verses 33 and 34. Straighten your fickle mind. Handanang chapalang chittang, durakhang dunnivarayang, ujunkaroti medhavi, usukarova tejanang, varijova thale kitto, okamo kata ubhato, pariphandati idang chittang, mara dhyang pahatave. The flickering, fickle mind, difficult to guard, difficult to control. The wise person straightens it as a fletcher straightens an arrow. Like a fish that is drawn from its watery abode and thrown upon land, even so does this mind flutter. Hence should the realm of the passions be shunned. Meghiya, who could not control his mind. On one occasion, on his return from his alms round, the Venerable Meghiya noticed a pleasant and beautiful mango grove, which he thought was an ideal spot for meditation. He asked the Buddha's permission to let him go there. At first, the Buddha asked him to wait for some time, knowing that simply liking another place would not help him in his meditation. Meghiya was in a hurry to go, and so he repeated his request again and again, until finally the Buddha allowed him to go. Thus, Meghiya set out for the mango grove, sat at the foot of a tree, and practiced meditation. He stayed there the whole day, but his mind kept wandering and he made no progress. He returned in the evening and reported to the Buddha how all the time he was assailed by thoughts associated with all sorts of mental defilements and disturbances. The Buddha admonished him that as the mind is easily excitable and fickle, one should control one's mind in a proper manner wherever one is. Reflecting mindfully on the admonition given by the Buddha, Meghiya attained the first stage of sainthood. Verse 35. Control your mind. Dunnighassa lahuno yatha kama nipatino chittassa damatho sadhu chittang dantang sukhavaham. The mind is difficult to control. Swiftly and lightly, it moves and lands wherever it pleases. It is good to tame the mind, for a well-tamed mind brings happiness. The lady mind reader, Matika Mata. Once, 60 bhikkhus, after each obtaining a subject of meditation from the Buddha, went to a village at the foot of a mountain. There, Matika Mata, mother of the village headman, offered them alms food. She also built a shelter for them, so that they could stay in the village during the rainy season. One day, she requested the bhikkhus to teach her meditation. They taught her how to meditate on the 32 constituents of the body, leading to the awareness of the decay and dissolution of the body. Matika Mata practiced with diligence and attained the third stage of sainthood, together with extraordinary knowledge and mental powers, even before the bhikkhus did. With the divine power of sight, or Dibbachakku, she saw that the bhikkhus had not attained insight. She also learned that these bhikkhus had enough potential for the attainment of arahanthood, but that they needed proper food because a weak body will not allow the mind to function at its best. So, she prepared nutritious food for them. With nutritious food and right effort, the bhikkhus developed right concentration and eventually attained arahanthood. At the end of the rainy season, the bhikkhus returned to the Jetavana monastery where the Buddha was in residence. They reported to the Buddha that all of them were in good health and in comfortable circumstances, and that they did not have to worry about food. They also mentioned Appamāda, who had been aware of their thoughts and had offered them the very good food that was necessary to keep them in good health, which is important for proper concentration. A certain bhikkhu, hearing them talking about Appamāda, decided that he too would go to the village. So, taking a subject of meditation from the Buddha, he arrived at the village monastery. There he found that everything he wished for was sent to him by Appamāda. When he wished for some food, she personally came to the monastery, bringing along choice food with her. After taking the food, he asked her if she really could read the thoughts of others, but she evaded his question and replied, "People who can read thoughts of others behave in such and such a way." Then the bhikkhu thought, "If I, like an ordinary worldling, should entertain any impure thoughts, and if she can really read thoughts, she is sure to think ill of me." He therefore became afraid of the lay devotee and decided to return to the Jetavana monastery. He told the Buddha that he could not stay in Matika's village because he was afraid that the lay devotee might detect impure thoughts in him. The Buddha then advised him to observe just one thing, that is, to control his mind. He also advised him to return to the village and not to think of anything else but the object of his meditation. The bhikkhu returned, and Appamāda offered him nutritious food as she had done to the others before him, so that he might be able to practice meditation without worry. Within a short time, he too purified his mind and attained arahanthood. Verse 36. Guard your thoughts. Sududdasang sunipunang yatha kamanipatinang chittang rakkhetha medhavi chittang guttang sukhavahang. The mind is very difficult to perceive, very delicate and subtle. It moves and lands wherever it pleases. The wise one should guard his mind, for a guarded mind brings happiness. A wise man should guard his thoughts. Once there lived in Savatthi the son of a banker. This young man asked the bhikkhu who used to come to his house for alms what he should do to be liberated from the ills of life. The bhikkhu instructed him to divide his property into 3 parts, 1 part to do business with, 1 part to support the family, and 1 part to give in charity. He did as he was told and again asked what should be done next. So he was further instructed, firstly, to take refuge in the Triple Gem, in the Buddha, in the Dhamma, and in the Sangha, and to observe the 5 precepts. Secondly, to observe the 10 precepts, and thirdly, to renounce the world and enter the holy order. The young man complied with all these instructions and became a bhikkhu. As a bhikkhu, he was taught the Dhamma by one teacher and the Vinaya, or the rules of conduct, by another. Being taught in this way, he felt that there was too much to be learned, that the disciplinary rules were too strict and too many, so much so that there was not enough freedom in the way of life of a bhikkhu. He thought that it might be better to return to the lay life. As a result of doubt and discontentment, he became unhappy and neglected his duties. He also became thin and weak. When the Buddha came to know about this, he admonished the young bhikkhu, "If you can only control your mind, you will have nothing more to control. So, guard your mind." Verse 37. Free are they who have controlled their minds. Durangamang ekacharang asarirang guhasayang ye chittang sanyamis santi Mokhanti Mara Bandhana. Faring far, wandering alone, bodiless, lying in a cave, is the mind. Those who subdue it are freed from the bond of Mara. The mind can wander afar. Sangharakkhita. Once there lived in Savatthi a senior bhikkhu by the name of Sangharakkhita. When his sister gave birth to a son, she named the child after this monk. He came to be known as the nephew Sangharakkhita, and this youth in due course was admitted into the order. While the young bhikkhu was staying in a village monastery, he was offered 2 sets of robes, and he decided to offer one set to the monk who was his uncle. At the end of the vassa, he went to pay respects to his uncle, and he offered the robe to him. But the uncle declined to accept the robe, saying that he had enough. Although he repeated his request, the elder would not accept. The young bhikkhu felt disheartened, thinking that his uncle did not like him. Since his uncle was so unwilling to share the requisites with him, he thought it would be better for him to leave the order and live the life of a layman. From that point, his mind wandered and a distracting stream of thoughts followed. He thought that after leaving the order, he would sell the robe and buy a she-goat. That she-goat would breed quickly, and soon he would make enough money to enable him to marry. His wife would give birth to a son. He would take his wife and child in a small cart to visit his uncle at the monastery. On the way, he would say that he would carry the child. She would tell him to drive the cart and not to bother about the child. He would insist and grab the child from her. Between them, the child would drop on the cart track and the wheel would pass over the child. He would get so furious with his wife that he would strike her with the goading stick. At that time, he was fanning his uncle monk with a fan, and he absent-mindedly struck the head of the monk with the fan. The monk, knowing the thoughts of the young bhikkhu, said, "You were unable to beat your wife. Why have you beaten an old bhikkhu?" Young Sangharakkhita was very much surprised and embarrassed at the words of his uncle. He also became extremely frightened and wanted to leave the monastery there and then. However, the elder monk managed to take him to the presence of the Buddha. When told about the whole episode, the Buddha spoke kindly to the young monk and said that the mind has the ability to think of an object even though it might be far away. This would naturally cause much distraction. Therefore, one should strive hard for liberation from the bondage of passion, ill will, and ignorance. Verses 38 and 39. To the vigilant, there is no fear. Anavattita chittasya saddhammang avijanato pariplava pasadasya panyana paripurati anavassuta chittasya ananvahata chetaso punya papa pahinasya natti jagarato bhayam. He whose mind is not steadfast, he who knows not the true doctrine, he whose confidence wavers, the wisdom of such a one will never be perfect. He whose mind is not soaked by lust, he who is not affected by hatred, he who has transcended both good and evil, for such a vigilant one there is no fear. The fickle-minded monk, Chitta Hatta. A man from Savatthi, after looking for his lost ox in the forest, felt very hungry and went to a village monastery, where he was given some food to eat. While taking his food, it occurred to him that even though he worked very hard every day, he could not get such good food and that it might be a good idea to become a monk. So he asked the bhikkhus to admit him into the order. At the monastery he performed the duties of a bhikkhu, and as there was plenty of food, he soon gained weight. After some time, he got weary of going around for alms food and returned to the life of a layman. A few days later, he felt that life at home was too strenuous, and he went back to the monastery to be admitted as a bhikkhu for a second time. For a second time, he left the order and returned to home life. Again, he went back to the monastery for a third time and left it. This shuttling process went on for 6 times, and because he acted only according to his whims, he was known as Chitta Hatta. While he was going back and forth between his home and the monastery, his wife became pregnant. He was actually not ready for renunciation, but he joined the order for his convenience. As a result, he was not happy either as a monk or as a layman. One day, during his last stay at home, he happened to enter the bedroom while his wife was asleep. She was fast asleep, snoring loudly, and saliva was trickling down her mouth. Seeing her with her mouth open, he realized the unpleasant nature of the body, and he reflected, "I have been a bhikkhu for several times, but I have not been able to remain in the robe because of my attraction for this woman." Hence, taking the yellow robe with him, he left his home for the monastery for the 7th time. As he went along, he repeated the words impermanence and unsatisfactoriness, and thus attained the first stage of sainthood on the way to the monastery. On arrival at the monastery, he requested the bhikkhus to admit him into the order. They refused and said, "We cannot admit you any more. You have been shaving your head so often that your head is like a wedding stone." Since he persisted with his request, the bhikkhus relented, and he was readmitted into the order. Within a few days, Chitta Hatta attained arahanthood. Other bhikkhus, seeing him staying on for a long time in the monastery, were surprised, and they asked him the reason. He replied, "I went home when I still had attachment in me, but now the attachment has been cut off." The bhikkhus reported the matter to the Buddha, who replied, "Chitta Hatta's mind was not steadfast at that time, and he did not understand the Dhamma. But now he is already an arahant. He has discarded all his attachments." A note from the author. It might be asked whether Chitta Hatta was wrong in having abandoned his wife. We must understand this story from a historical viewpoint. In India, at the time of the Buddha, it was considered quite honorable for a man to give up the worldly life and take to the monastic life at any time. The social structure was such that other members of the family would willingly care for the wife and the child because the husband had made a big sacrifice in becoming a holy man. Verse 40. Fortify your mind and be non-attached. Kumbhupamang kayamimang viditva, nagarupamang chittamidang thapitva, yodetha marang panyayudhena, jitancha rakhe anivesano siya. Realizing that this body is as fragile as a jar, establishing this mind as firm as a fortified city, he should attack Mara with the weapon of wisdom. He should guard his conquest and be without attachment. The spirits which disturbed the monks. A group of bhikkhus from Savatthi, after each obtaining a subject of meditation from the Buddha, traveled to a place far away and came to a large forest grove, a suitable place for meditation. The guardian spirits of the trees dwelling in that forest thought that if those bhikkhus were staying in the forest, it would not be proper for them to live with their families in the trees. So they descended from the trees, thinking that the bhikkhus would stop there only for one night. But the bhikkhus were still there at the end of a fortnight, and it occurred to them that the bhikkhus might be staying there till the end of the rainy season. They realized that if that was so, they and their families would have to live on the ground for a long time. So they decided to frighten away the bhikkhus by making ghostly sounds and frightful visions. They showed up with bodies without heads, and with heads without bodies, etc. The bhikkhus were very upset and left the place and returned to the Buddha and related everything to him. The Buddha told them that this had happened because previously they went without any weapon, and that they should go back there armed with a suitable weapon. So saying, the Buddha taught them the entire Metta Sutta, the discourse on loving kindness, as their weapon. The bhikkhus were instructed to radiate their loving kindness to all beings that inhabit the earth while reciting the Metta Sutta. They should harbor no ill will or fear towards any being. Thus the bhikkhus returned to the forest grove and did exactly as they were told. The guardian spirits of the trees, on receiving loving kindness from the bhikkhus, reciprocated by readily welcoming and not harming them. They willingly stayed on the ground, and so much harmony and peace was generated. There were no more ghostly sounds and ungainly sights. Thus, left in peace, the bhikkhus meditated on the body and came to realize its fragile and impermanent nature. Verse 41. Be detached from your body. Achirang vatayang kayo pataving adisessati chuddho apeta vinyano nirathang va kalingarang. Before long, alas, this body, deprived of consciousness, will lie on the earth, discarded like a useless log. The monk with a stinking body. Putigatta Tissa. After taking a subject of meditation from the Buddha, Venerable Tissa started his meditation diligently. At that time he was afflicted with a disease. Small boils appeared all over his body, and these developed into big sores. When these sores burst, his robes became sticky and stained with pus and blood, and his whole body began to stink. For this reason he was known as Putigatta Tissa, the monk with a stinking body. The Buddha happened to see the sorrowful state of the monk, who had been abandoned by his fellow monks on account of his stinking body. At the same time, he also knew that Tissa would soon attain arahanthood. So, the Buddha proceeded to the fire shed, close to the place where the monk was staying. There he personally boiled some water, went to the place where the monk was lying down, and took hold of the edge of the couch. It was then only that the other monks also gathered round him, and as instructed by the Buddha, they carried him out where he was washed and bathed. While he was being bathed, his robes were washed and dried. After the bath, the monk became fresh in body and mind, and soon developed one-pointedness of concentration. Standing at the head of the couch, the Buddha told him that this body, when devoid of life, would be as useless as a log, and would be laid on the earth. At the conclusion of the sermon, Tissa attained arahanthood. Soon after, he passed away into parinibbana. The Buddha then directed some bhikkhus to cremate his body and enshrine his relics in a stupa. On being questioned why Tissa had a stinking body, the Buddha revealed that Tissa, in one of his past existences, was a cruel fowler. He used to trap and catch birds. After catching the birds, he would break their leg bones and wing bones to prevent them from escaping. For those evil deeds, Tissa was born with a stinking body. Then the Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, you do not have your mother or father here who can tend to you. If you do not tend to one another, who will be there to tend to you? Remember that whoever tends a sick person tends to me, as it were." Verse 42. An ill-disposed mind is the greatest enemy. Diso disang yang tang kaira, veri va pana verinang, michha panihitang chittang, papiyo nang tato kare. Whatever harm a foe may do to a foe, or a hater to a hater, yet an ill-directed mind can do oneself far greater harm. Nanda, the herdsman. Nanda was a herdsman who looked after the cows of a rich man. Although only a herdsman, he saved whatever he could. Occasionally he would go to the house of his master, and there he sometimes met the Buddha and listened to his discourses. Nanda invited the Buddha to pay a visit to his house, but the Buddha did not go to Nanda's house immediately, saying that it was not yet time. After some time, while traveling with his bhikkhus, the Buddha made a detour to visit Nanda, knowing that the time was ripe for him to comprehend his teaching properly. Nanda respectfully received the Buddha and his bhikkhus, and he served them food for several days. On the last day, after hearing the discourse given by the Buddha, Nanda attained the first stage of sainthood. As the Buddha was leaving that day, he followed him for some distance, carrying the bowl of the Buddha. Then he paid homage to the Blessed One and turned back to go home. At that instant, a hunter, who was an old enemy of Nanda, shot him dead. The bhikkhus who were following after the Buddha came upon the body of the dead Nanda. They reported the matter to the Buddha, saying, "Venerable Sir, because you came here, Nanda, who made great offerings to you and accompanied you on your return, was killed as he was turning back to go home." The Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, whether I came here or not, there would have been no escape from death for him because of his previous kamma. Therefore, you must reflect that a wrongly directed mind can do oneself much greater harm than an enemy or a thief can. A well-directed mind is the only security one can have against danger." Verse 43. A well-directed mind is far greater than even a mother or a father. Natang mata pita kaira anyeva picha nyataka samma panihitang chittang seyaso nang tato kare. What neither mother nor father nor any other relative can do, a well-directed mind does and thereby elevates one. A mother of two and a father of two. Soreya. On one occasion, Soreya, a rich man accompanied by a friend and some attendants, went out in a luxurious carriage for a bath. At that moment, Venerable Mahakachayana was adjusting his robes outside the city, before going into the city for alms. Soreya, seeing the golden complexion of the monk, thought, "How I wish the monk were my wife, or else that the complexion of my wife were like this." Later he realized that his sex had mysteriously begun to change. He was very much ashamed of what had happened, and so he decided to leave the country. Soreya, now a woman, offered her signet ring to some people going to Taxila, to allow her to go along with them in their carriage. Meanwhile, his friends and relatives looked for Soreya everywhere, but could not find him. On arrival at Taxila, her companions told a young rich man of Taxila about the lady who came along with them. The young rich man, finding her to be very beautiful and of a suitable age for him, married her. As a result of this marriage, 2 sons were born. There were also 2 sons from the previous marriage of Soreya as a man. One day, a rich man's son from the city where Soreya had lived previously came to Taxila. Lady Soreya, recognizing him to be an old friend, sent for him. The man was surprised that he was invited, because he did not know her, and asked her whether she knew him. She answered that she knew him and also inquired after the health of her family and other people in the city she had left behind. The man next told her about the rich young man who had disappeared mysteriously. Then the lady Soreya revealed her identity and related all that had happened about the wrongful thoughts, the change of sex, and her marriage to the young rich man of Taxila. The men then advised the lady Soreya to ask the pardon of Venerable Mahakachayana. The monk was accordingly invited to the home of Soreya, and alms food was offered to him. After the meal, the lady Soreya was brought to the presence of the monk, and he was told that the lady was at one time a man. It was explained to the monk how Soreya was turned into a female on account of his wrongful thoughts towards a holy man. Lady Soreya then respectfully asked for the pardon of Mahakachayana. As soon as Venerable Mahakachayana uttered the words, "Soreya, get up, I forgive you," she changed to a male again. Thereupon her husband said to Soreya, "Good friend, since you are the mother of these 2 boys and I am their father, they are truly sons of us both. Therefore, you can continue to live here. Don't be depressed." Soreya replied, "Good friend, first I was a man, then I was a woman, and now I have again become a man. First I became the father of 2 sons, and recently I became the mother of 2 sons. After having gone through 2 transformations in one existence, I have no more desires for the household life. I will become a bhikkhu and lead the holy life under my noble elder. Now it is your duty to care for these 2 boys. Don't neglect them." So saying, Soreya kissed the 2 boys and embraced them, and handing them over to their father, departed from the house. Soreya also expressed his heartfelt gratitude to his friend for helping him to meet and seek the pardon of Venerable Mahakachayana, and the opportunity to work for his ultimate goal in life, to put an end to all sufferings. Accordingly, Venerable Mahakachayana ordained Soreya as a bhikkhu. Soreya strove diligently for his spiritual development. In the course of time, he accompanied Venerable Mahakachayana to pay his respects to the Buddha at Jetavana Monastery. After that, he was often asked, "Whom do you love more, the 2 sons you had as a father or the 2 you had as a mother?" To them he would answer that his love for those born of the womb was greater. This question was put to him so often that he felt very much annoyed and ashamed. So he stayed by himself and with diligence contemplated on the decay and dissolution of the body. He soon attained arahanthood, together with extraordinary knowledge and mental powers. When the old question was next put to him, he replied that he had no personal attachment for anyone. The bhikkhus who heard his reply were doubtful and consulted the Buddha. Upon being told about Soreya's different answers, the Buddha said, "His answer now is different because he has now realized arahanthood, and so has no more attachment. His well-directed mind has brought about in himself a well-being which neither father nor mother can bestow on him."